Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bible study on the farm at the Heart of Junction Church in downtown Grand Junction, Colorado. Tonight we're going to be talking about creation versus evolution, part 5, biological evolution. So if you would, let's have a word of prayer and we'll jump right in. God, we just want to come to you tonight and ask that you would please have your hand of blessing upon everything we do. God, I certainly want to ask that you would speak through me and help us all to hear something, Lord, that'll help us to get closer to you. And God, what I always want whenever we get together and we study the Bible and talk about your creation, I hope and pray that you would give us just a real serious desire to read the Bible and study the Bible and pray and grow closer to you. And God, we know that you have a purpose for all of us in our life. Somehow you have something you want us to do or accomplish for you, and we just ask you that you would prepare us for that and help us through that. We love you greatly, Lord. Thank you for this time. Thank you that we still live in a country where we can get together any night of the week and study the Bible in public. And Lord, with that, please bless everything we put our hand to tonight. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I'd like to start off with a little bit about what I believe, so there is no confusion. I kind of have a minute or two where I go over a little review, and I do this every evening just so that if this is the only video you ever watch or the only session you attend, you kind of get caught up and you know where we are and who we are and what we believe. So I believe the Bible to be the complete and inerrant Word of God. 1 Timothy, nope, that's already wrong. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 best sums up my feelings about the Bible. It says, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. Now, I believe that the Bible is not a book written about God, but it is a book written by God, and that distinction is very important. And I understand, really, when I think about my beliefs concerning the Bible, they are strange. I believe that all we have to do is read the Bible and believe it, and our life would improve, our family would improve, and our nation would improve. I don't believe we need to try to figure out what the Bible really means here or there. I think we can take the Bible for just what it says, and if God means anything different, he usually lets us know that right up front. But I take a very strict hermeneutical view of the Bible. I take it very literally, and that is the reason that, I believe God created everything in 6 literal days. Now, we're going to briefly look at the evolutionary timeline versus the biblical timeline, just so we see that there is a difference between the two, and we kind of start from so that we're all on the same page. So the evolutionary timeline starts somewhere between 15 to 20 billion years ago. They say that there was a Big Bang. And they don't know what exploded, but they say that there was matter and it was compressed into a tiny little spot, and then for whatever reason, somehow, we don't know what lit the fuse, but there was an explosion. And that sent matter hurling through the newly formed universe, and that is the origin story for the evolutionist. Then, sometime over the next 10 to 15 billion years, the sun, moon, stars, and planets formed throughout the universe. And then they teach us in the textbooks that Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. And we talked about this, 2 or 3 sessions ago. If you want the whole lesson, you can look back on our session called Astronomy in the Bible, where we debunk all the physical processes that they use to explain the origin of the stars, planets, moons, all of those things. But they say that it happened about 4.5 billion years ago. That's what you read in the textbooks in the high schools and colleges still today all over America. Then about 3.5 billion years ago, they say life appeared. And I always get a chuckle when I, read this, but they said swirling in the midst of the, there was a complex chemical soup, and evolving or life appearing from a complex chemical soup is very slow. I didn't write this portion down in my notes, so I'm just trying to recite it from memory. But they believe that the origin of life came from chemicals. They believe that the right chemicals came together and they produced life. And then, after that, about 3.5 million years ago, that life finally turned into something that we recognize, and that is modern man. So here we read about 30 million years ago, monkeys and apes evolved to both humans and modern apes. Now, whenever you see that term millions of years ago, that means we don't know if or when this actually happened, because nobody was there. So I always ask the question, well, how do you know that? Were you there? Well, no, I wasn't there, but, I learned about it in college. Well, was your professor there? No, he wasn't there either. So we go back millions and millions of years, and that's where primates started to turn into humans. So the textbooks, they are famous for illustrating a picture and thinking it counts as evidence. Here, you have a picture of modern man, and as you go back in time, the creatures look more and more like a monkey. And you see all the way on the left, you have an ape, and all the way on the right, you have a human, and you have several transitional forms in between those two. And then the whole picture, as far as biological evolution is concerned, life arose from non-living material, and then miraculously it found something to eat and something to marry, and it reproduced, and it created offspring. And over billions of years, that life grew eyes and teeth and a heart and gills, and it changed into a fish. It's going to be back there. If that's up on the screen, it's on the computer back there. Yeah, I don't know why they're trying to sell us something on the computer. Let's see if this works. Okay. That was the funniest monologue of the night. You just messed it right up, right in the middle of it. Okay, so where were we? The fish. Okay, so we have a fish, and then that fish learned to breathe, and that fish grew legs, and that fish came up and walked on land. And then the amphibian that lost its gills and grew lungs and turned into a reptile. Then the reptile became warm-blooded and turned into a bird, and its bones became hollow, and it somehow grew feathers. And then some of those reptiles also branched off and grew fur and learned how to lactate and became mammals, and they turned into primates, and the primates turned into God-denying evolutionists. And that's actually not fair. I know some evolutionists who love God. They just obviously don't believe the Bible because they believe in evolution instead of special creation. So the Bible tells a slightly different story. The Bible says that 6,000 years ago, there was a supernatural creation by God where he created everything in 6 literal days, just like we experience today. About 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood in the days of Noah, and during that flood, everything on earth died, other than Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives. They took 2 animals of every type on board the ark, and they took 7 types of animals of certain kinds, and beyond that, everything died. After they got off the boat, started to repopulate the earth, and about 2,000 years ago was when Jesus was born. And then roughly 33 years after that, Jesus was crucified, which was the single most widely publicized death in Earth's history. This brings us to our topic tonight, biological evolution. So how do you go from a single-celled organism to a human being? Because it takes a lot more than just drawing some pictures and lying to children. So here are the 6 types of evolution, and we've gone over this several times. I break the term evolution down into 6 different definitions. The top 5 are religious world views. Tonight, we're going to be talking about number 5 and number 6. Number 5 is a religious worldview, macroevolution, changing from one kind of an animal into another. We've never seen this in nature, and we've never been able to reproduce it in a laboratory. Number 6, microevolution, is variations within a kind of animal. That's the only definition for evolution that we see in nature. And unfortunately, the evolutionists use that as evidence to believe that one animal can turn into another kind. So let's start by defining some terms. I've already used a few of them. We have the term kind and we have the term species. Now, the Bible uses the word kind, but modern biology uses the term species. Carl von Linnaeus came up with our modern classification system. We classify animals today under kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. We typically talk about an animal using the last two levels of classification, their genus and species. For example, Tyrannosaurus rex, Homo sapien. That is the genus and species of a type of reptile we call a dinosaur, and a Homo sapien is a modern human being. The term species is defined as related organisms that share common characteristics and are capable of interbreeding. That is how modern biology defines species. But because of this, the evolutionist says that they have seen evolution take place when there is a change in the species. And this is false. That is not macroevolution. And we're going to show you the difference between the two here in a minute. Now, the Bible doesn't use the term species. The Bible uses the term kind. The fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. The living creature after his kind. 10 times in the first chapter of Genesis alone, things bring forth after their kind. Now, here on the screen, we see different kinds of dogs. You have big dogs and small dogs and black dogs and white dogs and gray dogs and dogs with thick fur and thin fur and long tails and short tails. But they're all dogs, and they only produce dogs every single time without fail. What you do not see here are cats. The cat kind is different than the dog kind. God might have made 2 dogs in the Garden of Eden. In over thousands of years, you get a great variety of dogs. My family has different dogs. We have a poodle that has curly hair, and we have a lab that has straight fur. Well, you can breed them together and make another dog, but it's still just a dog. You can breed a great variety of dogs to get all different types of traits and characteristics, but no matter how often you breed those dogs, you know what they're going to produce? Dogs. Every single time, without fail. So, here you see, let's see, where are we at? There we go. Here you see a dog, Canis domesticus, a wolf, Canis lupus, and a coyote, Canis latrans. All 3 have the genus name Canis, but they are all a different species. What's funny is that they can all interbreed. By the biological definition, they should be a different species. God did the same thing with birds and cats and horses. There are a great variety of cats and birds and horses. He probably produced 2 horses in the beginning in the Garden of Eden, and they produced a great variety of them, but they all produce horses. They're always producing after their kind. So if you step back 20 feet and take a look at the screen or look at these animals, you can tell the different kinds of animals. Even a 6-year-old can tell the different kind of animal. Levi, how old are you? You're 10. Do we have anyone younger than 10? How old are you? You're 10 also? Is that the youngest we've got? Okay, we're going to do a 10-year-old. Okay, Levi, on the screen, we have a wolf, a dog, a coyote, and an elephant. Which is the different kind of animal? You got to pick one animal. There's a wolf, a dog, a coyote, and an elephant. Which one's the different kind of animal? The elephant. Look at that. Okay, a 10-year-old can do it. I've had 5-year-olds that can do it. You step back 20 feet, you can see the different kind of animal. So, we explained how the Bible views kind. Now, what is the problem with the definition of species? Well, a species is a group of organisms that share similar characteristics and that can interbreed with one another to produce fertile offspring. But a wolf and a dog can produce fertile offspring, but they're different species. And you see, the problem is, we're going to get to the problem. I'm going to stay on my notes here. Okay, so let me ask you this. What is the original kind of horse? Here, you have zebras, horses, donkeys, and ponies all producing offspring, and they are fertile offspring. Here is a herd of zorses. It's a mix of zebras and horses. Here is a lion and a tiger mix. It's called a liger. They also have wholphins. That is a whale and a dolphin mix. See, lions and tigers are the same kind of animal. They're large cats, and they can breed fertile offspring. God uses the term kind over and over. In Genesis 1:21, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And in verse 25, and God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and every living thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And that is still what we see today. Every kind of animal produces after their own kind. You never see any kind of animal produce a different kind of offspring. Now, let's change gears here a little bit. What is the main claim of the evolutionist when we're talking about evolutionary biology? Charles Darwin said, "It is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other." What does he mean by that? And first of all, I don't think he understands the definition of the word fact. But what does he mean by that? Well, that means that humans and bananas are related to each other. Isn't that what he's saying? All plants and all animals share a common heritage. That means if you go back far enough in the family tree, you are related to the banana. Now here, let's see. Here, the textbooks say humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. Now, do you know that when bacteria swim through its world, it's the equivalent of a human being swimming 60 miles an hour? Just so you know, you think you're that much greater than a bacteria? Think again. They're a lot faster. So the evolutionist believes that all animals and all plants have a common ancestor. They believe in what they call the evolutionary tree. And no matter what textbook you open up, if you're talking about biology, especially evolutionary biology, you're going to see at least one picture of an evolutionary tree. And the idea is the ancestors all come back down to one single life form that came from organic evolution or chemical evolution billions of years ago. The creationist believes in something very different. Here you have what's called the creationist orchard. It's not one tree, it's many. So in the Garden of Eden, God created 2 frogs and 2 birds, butterflies, dogs, reptiles, etc. Then, over thousands of years, each animal produced a variety of animals with slight variations. There were different sizes, shapes, and colors of frogs. But all the frogs only produced frogs. The same thing happened with the birds and the butterflies and the dogs and the reptiles. Then there was a bottleneck. About 4,400 years ago, at the time of the flood in the days of Noah, God told Noah, you're going to take 2 of every kind of animal on the ark. And just so you know, it wasn't 2 of every kind of animal. It was 2 of every land-dwelling, air-breathing animal. Insects were not included. Noah did not take fish. Okay, there's plenty of water. He took 2 of every land-dwelling, air-breathing animal. and 7 of certain kinds. We're not going to get into the specifics of why and get out into the weeds. So then there was a bottleneck. But then after the flood, they got off of the boat, and 2 of each kind of animal, they get off the ark, and they start mating and producing offspring, and then they produce, once again, a great variety of animals. And that is the creationist orchard. There's a tree for the frogs, and a tree for the dogs, and a tree for the horses, and a tree for every kind of animal. But they all came from the 2 that got off the ark. Now, here is a Mexican textbook. They got it right. They said there's a common ancestor for the horse and the donkey and the zebra. Well, what was it? Well, it was a type of horse. So, how does macroevolution work? And remember, we are not asking the question, how do you produce a long, curly-haired dog from a short-haired dog? That's a variation within a kind. What we're asking is, how do you turn a fish into an amphibian? Because if you believe in biological evolution, that had to happen at some point. How do you turn a bird into a reptile? Or I'm sorry, vice versa. How do you turn a reptile into a bird? Because again, if you want to believe in biological evolution, that had to happen. So what's the mechanism for that? How do you take an animal like a starfish and give it vision? And I'm not talking about a clear set of goals that it accomplished through dedication and principle. I'm talking about being able to see. How does an animal like a starfish develop an eye and learn to see? Because once again, that had to happen at some point if you believe in biological evolution. If we are to believe that a single-celled organism turns into a human being, we either have one large problem or we have millions and millions of small problems. How does the cell learn to grow a tooth or an ear or an eye? Not to mention, with the eye, it's made up of a cornea, an anterior chamber, an iris, a lens, a pupil, a retina, photoreceptors, an optic nerve, and then the right spot in the brain for that optic nerve to plug in so that the brain is able to take the information and process it and give you a visual image. Here's another problem. Let's assume you have an animal, and this animal does not have an eye, but it has a brain. Okay, we'll assume this creature has a brain. We'll call this animal a teenager. If it grows an eye, how will the brain recognize the new structure? It isn't necessarily going to be compatible, right? How well does an Apple program work on a Microsoft computer? Do you go to the Apple Store and download apps for your Android phone? No. Why not? They're both smartphones. They all take apps. Why doesn't it work? Because it wasn't designed to be compatible. There are 2 intelligent designers that had different ideas, and they made proprietary software. The brain, infinitely more complex than any machine ever invented, the brain is the essence of what makes us human. That's a quote from an article in National Geographic. So, National Geographic, a godless magazine that promotes evolution every chance it gets, that magazine thinks a creator made the machine. But the brain that it says is infinitely more complex than any machine ever made, they're saying that evolved by chance over millions of years. Is that what it's saying? That's what it comes up with. Charles Darwin said, "To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree." So there you have it. You can tell your friends. Patrick Hayes and Charles Darwin agree on something. So I want to explore this idea for a minute, and it's going to relate to that picture on the screen. Just bear with me. We're going to get there. this is a section I just added this morning that I think will help us all to understand just how complicated adding an eye to an animal would be. So, the human eye has many complicated parts. It's made up of a cornea, an anterior and posterior chamber, an iris, a pupil. It's made up of a lens which, by the way, is more complicated than any lens we have ever created on planet Earth. It also has a retina, photoreceptors, an optic nerve, sclera, along with muscles, ligaments, and blood vessels. As far as the components used for vision, here's the question. How many of them can you remove from the eye and still have vision? Yeah, the answer is 0. The idea is called irreducible complexity. To explain this idea, we are not going to use a biological system, nothing complicated like the eye. We are going to use a simple machine. We are going to use the mousetrap. Has everyone seen one of these? Do most of us have some experience with how they work? Okay. If we've seen any Looney Tunes cartoons from 1980 till 1990, we know what these are. The mousetrap is made up of 5 simple parts. You have the wood board, the holding bar, the spring, the trigger, and the hammer. Now, along with that, we have a couple of staples that hold these pieces onto the board. But the mousetrap is essentially made up of 5 basic parts. And just so we're clear, none of these parts by themselves will catch mice. They won't do it independently. So, what is the theory of irreducible complexity? Well, number one, all the components are necessary for the function of the system. Out of those 5 parts, can you take away any one part and still have that machine catch mice? Nope. You need all 5 parts. There is no way it will catch mice if you remove any of them. All the parts are needed to be present at the same time, just like the human eye. Number 2, all the components need to perform at a level suitable for its purpose. So there are certain specs that these parts need to fall in. If we took one part of the mousetrap, let's take the spring, and we say, well, we're kind of cheap making mousetraps. We're going to get these springs that are about 25% of the power of the normal spring. Would that still work? Probably not. It would very softly flop the hammer over and bump the mouse on the head, and that would be about all it does. See, the parts need to fall within certain specifications for it to work. They just not only need to be present, they need to be the right size and the right strength. Finally, all the components need to be assembled appropriately to perform the task. If you took all the parts off of the board and then you stapled them all back on the board wherever you wanted, would that catch mice? No, obviously not. You can't mix up the parts and have it still work. In other words, creative, intelligent forces are needed behind every functioning system. The mousetrap is irreducibly complex. You cannot remove one piece and still have it work. The eye is irreducibly complex. As far as all the parts required for vision, you can't remove the lens and still see. You can't remove the retina and still see. You need all the parts. You need them all there together. So how does that evolve slowly over millions of years through small gradual steps? Because you need every single one of the parts all at once functioning properly to be able to see. Charles Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. I agree. So the question is, I hit the wrong button. We're going to stay right there. So the question is, did all the parts of the eye randomly evolve at the same time? Because any of the individual parts would be worthless without the rest functioning together. Forget about the eyeball. It is impossible to explain a simple machine like the mousetrap by evolutionary processes. Forget about complex systems like the eye or what the eye plugs into, the brain. Okay, so the major problem for evolution is that it requires new information added to the DNA of an animal. It would be like adding a room addition onto a set of blueprints. It doesn't happen by accident. There's a lot of information you need to be applied. You have a simple house you're going to build, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the customer says, well, we want to add a garage. Okay, we can do it. But you not only need to add the foundation and the framing and the electrical and the drywall and, you know, the windows and doors and a new truss package and more insulation, you also need to tie it all together with the existing blueprints to make it work. Now, for humans, our blueprints are contained in a molecule called DNA. So let me ask you, why aren't humans ever born with wings? Anyone? Go ahead, Mac. What do you think? It's not in our DNA. Now, it is in the DNA of a dragonfly and a chicken, but it's not. And some buffaloes, apparently. Don't worry. But humans do not have the blueprints written down in their DNA for wings, so they will never grow wings. How do you get new information added to your DNA? Where is the new information coming from? The answer for the evolutionist is mutations. Now, for those of you who had a girlfriend back in high school, you might not recognize the picture in the upper left-hand corner. Those are the X-Men. In the Marvel comic book series, they were mutants. So a mutation is a permanent change in hereditary material involving a change in chromosome relations or a biochemical change in the codons. Now, in real life, a mutation doesn't allow you to control the weather or shoot lasers out of your eyes. Most mutations are harmful, and no mutation ever adds new information to your DNA. Never, not one time, ever. This Holt biology textbook says that beneficial mutations are the raw material needed for natural selection. Okay, so beneficial mutations are what are needed, right? Why don't they show us a picture of one? They show us a picture of a housefly. And this housefly, instead of having one pair of wings, it has two. Do you know what that fly cannot do? It cannot fly. Because only one set of those wings is connected to muscles that have nerves, which is what's required for those wings to move. So all they do is they get in the way of the pair of wings that do work, and that four-winged fly is now called a crawl. Here's a question. Is that a beneficial mutation? No. Did it add any new information to the DNA of that animal? No. Does every fly already grow a pair of wings? Yeah. That one just messed up and it grew 2 pair. That's not new information. It's just a duplicate of information that already exists in its DNA. Here are short-legged sheep. Is this a beneficial mutation? Yeah. No, maybe for the wolf it's beneficial. This is not a beneficial mutation either. Was any new information added to the sheep? No. Sheep can already grow legs. These just grow legs that are shorter. And yet, a majority of mutations, both those arising in laboratories and those stored in natural populations, produce deteriorations of viability, hereditary diseases, and monstrosities. Such changes, it would seem, can hardly serve as evolutionary building blocks. Okay, I'll show you several more pictures of mutations just for the kids. Here is a 2-headed turtle. So, I don't know how old that turtle is, but he is a turtle and he is a mutant. Good. Okay, here is a bull with 5 legs. Now, the 5th leg is growing out of the bull's shoulder, and once again, he can't use it for anything, but it is there. Here is a snake with 2 heads. And here is a chicken that cannot grow feathers. Now, none of those mutations are beneficial, and none of them add new information to the animal's DNA. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it is almost impossible to find a beneficial mutation. And those that are beneficial still, on a molecular level, show a loss of genetic information. And we can go over all the specifics if you want to go over bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. If you want, we can go over all of them, and I can show you that every single one is a loss of genetic information. Never again, not one time, ever. So, but in all the reading I've done in the life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation that added information. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. For example, the snake with 2 heads, is that adding genetic information? No, the snake can already grow a head. It just grew another one. It would be adding information if it grew wings, but it never does. The DNA in the snake already has the capacity to grow a head. Every snake I've ever seen has had a head. That one just had 2. Now, for 100 years, horse breeders have been trying to make faster and faster horses to win races. Here we have the times for the Kentucky Derby. Their horses are getting faster, but there is a limit. No matter how often or how long they breed horses, they will never make one with wings so it can fly around the track, because the information just is not there. Now, I forgot to bring this up here with me, so I can't hold up the video, but you can see it on the screen. This video is a great one for any Christian to have in their library. It goes into great, or actually I should say much greater detail with DNA, genetic information, and intelligent design. And it's been a while since I've watched this one, but I am almost positive that this video is 100% old Earth evolutionary biologists. There is not a single creationist in the whole video, and all of them get together and they go over evolution and they say, this just doesn't work. None of them are, Bible-believing, God-fearing anything. But they say, as far as evolution goes, we got to find something else out. The theory is dead. So this is a great video if you want to watch it. It's a great one to lend to your friends. Okay, so, and I have a couple of copies of this. I already lent one of them out today. If anyone wants to borrow mine, you're welcome to. I'm pretty sure you can rent it on Amazon.com for $2 if you want to watch it. Okay, so what is the mechanism for evolution. Boy, I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay. What is required? Now, we already went over the first item, which is mutations. Then, what do we need to add to mutations? We need to add natural selection. What is natural selection? The evolutionist says that natural selection can lead to evolution. The classic example often given in the textbooks is the giraffe. They say that giraffes started out with short necks, and they needed longer necks to reach up real high and eat the leaves off of the tall trees and the taller branches. So the giraffes continued to stretch their necks, and then the next generation, their babies had longer necks, and then what happened was all the giraffes born with shorter necks died. That's what natural selection is. It includes death, and lots of it. So there's supposed to be a beneficial mutation, and then that mutation takes over, which means all the giraffes with the long necks were able to still eat the leaves on the trees, and all the giraffes that didn't have that mutation, that had the shorter necks, they're going to die off, which means all the new babies born are going to be born with long necks. Okay, there we go. So, let's just move on to this. What would happen if we took all the chihuahuas in the world and released them into the wild? Okay. Well, the fact is, the weak, worthless, stupid, worthless, ugly, annoying, worthless chihuahuas would all die off. Every chihuahua on earth could get eaten by a wolf, but that would not help create new kinds of animals. Natural selection is only nature's form of quality control. That's all it does. The last ingredient for macroevolution is time, and I mean lots of it. They require millions and millions of years. The reason is because the changes that they see in animals in nature are so small and insignificant that the assumption is that it would take millions and millions of years of these tiny little changes to make up major changes, which are required to go from one kind of an animal to another. And if you're not sure about how old the Earth is, you can go back. We have a video called The Age of the Earth where we go over I don't know how many proofs. I mean, we're talking hundreds that show with empirical science that there is no way the Earth could be any older than 10,000 years. Now, we're going to switch gears here again, and we're going to go over some of the proofs for evolution. This is another book if you want to read up more on this subject. It's called Icons of Evolution. It is a great book that debunks all of the so-called greatest examples of evolution. I have the book in the back. There's also a video, which I also have in the back. I forgot to bring it up here. You can buy those or you can borrow mine. Heck, for that matter, you can buy mine. I think I have 10 copies of the book. Okay, so let's go over some of these icons of evolution. Okay, so what are the great proofs the evolutionists have? And all of these wonderful proofs are in the textbooks. They're in the high school and college textbooks all over America. So we're going to look at two right now. In 1841, the earliest so-called horse fossil was found near London. The scientist who unearthed it, Richard Owen, found a complete skull that looked like a fox's head, but it had multiple back teeth like you would find in a hoofed animal. He called it Hyracotherium, and he saw no connection between it and the modern-day horse. Later, more animals were found, and they tried to link them with the skull found by Richard Owen and the modern horse. Then, in 1879, Nathaniel C. Marsh and Thomas Huxley drew a picture of the animals in ascending order and said that they evolved into the modern horse. The problem is, the uniform continuous transformation of Hyracotherium into Equus, so dear to the hearts of generations of textbook writers, never happened in nature. That quote is from George Gaylord Simpson of Harvard University. But even though the leading evolutionists think the horse evolution is a hoax, the horse evolution is still on display in the Peabody Museum at Yale, and it is in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Here we read, I admit that an awful lot of that imaginary stories has gotten into the textbooks as though it were true. For instance, the most famous example still on exhibit downstairs in the American Museum is the exhibit on horse evolution, prepared perhaps 50 years ago. That has been presented as literal truth in textbook after textbook. Now, I think that is lamentable. This quote is from Dr. Niles Eldridge. At the time, he was the curator of the Museum of Natural History. If he knows that it's fake, then remove the exhibit. For crying out loud, you are the curator. You have the authority to set up whatever you want. They knowingly have false information on display at the New York Museum of Natural History. That's what he's saying. Let's see. This example of evolution was made up by Nathaniel C. Marsh from fossils scattered all around the world. This is one of the problems. These different skeletons making up the horse evolution model, they weren't all found in one area, which would at least give the opportunity for them to be related to one another. They were found all over the globe. Along with that, another problem is that modern horses are found in layers with and lower than the ancient horses. So how did the modern horse evolve from the ancient horse if the modern horse is found in layers of the earth buried below the ancient horse? How does that work? We've never gone into the whole geology thing. Like, we've touched on it in a couple of different sessions, but there are so many problems with using layers to date things. You will find polystrata fossils where a fossil runs up through half a dozen different layers of sediment. Well, how do you determine what layers are what age? How did the fossil end up in multiple layers? You'll find modern animals buried underneath what they call ancient ones. It's a mess. We need to put together a session just on geology. We're not going to get into it now. I'm just, I guess, venting to everybody. Okay, here we have two different types of horses. In the top left is King Legear, the largest horse ever recorded. He was 7 feet tall at the shoulder. If you're a horse person, he's 7 feet tall at the wither. The smallest horse ever measured was just 18 inches tall. Now, these two animals are both 100% horse. But if they died and were buried and fossilized, and an evolutionist dug them up, they would say they were two different animals and that one evolved into the other. Now, I can't emphasize this enough, but arranging animals in order on paper does not prove any relationship. Furthermore, lining up fossils on a table or in a museum doesn't prove anything. When you have a fossil, what does that prove? Empirically. Okay? So you have the remnants, right? Because a fossil isn't the actual bone, but minerals ate away at the bone and made its own cast. Okay, so there used to be a bone there. So what does that prove? There's only one thing it proves. Something died. That's it. A fossil does not prove that it had any kids, let alone different kids. We don't know any of that. The only thing we know for sure from a fossil is something died. That's it. And they lay up this fossil, and this one's a little different, and this one's a little different. Like, look at that. There's the procession. You don't know that they're related. You don't know any of that. You know 3 things died. That's what you know. That is empirical science. Anything beyond that, it's wishful thinking, but it's not science. Here is Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is the name given to a fossil that was believed to be the halfway point between dinosaurs and birds. When it was discovered, it was a big deal. This is an article from USA Today. Here's an article from National Geographic. Now, National Geographic, of course, they draw a picture and give it muscle and tissue and skin and feathers and eyes and the whole thing, because it's a lot easier to lie to people with a full-colored picture than it is just a fossil. But they really thought that this was just the greatest thing since sliced bread. Dinosaurs turned into birds, and now we have some fossils, some intermediary stages. This is wonderful. And they were talking about this. It was in every issue. This was the whole, just never ended with this. Until a year later, when it was discovered that it was a fake. It was created by a Chinese farmer who found it. He actually made impressions in some soft dirt with feathers that he had to try to get it to look like this reptile had feathers and that it was a bird. And what you end up finding out is that in a country where people make a couple $dozen a month, they found out that they can sell fossils for tens of thousands of dollars to museums around the world. So guess where the majority of fossils all of a sudden come from? Yep, the Chinese countryside. And forgeries come out of there constantly. There are other ones called the Archaeoraptor that ended up being fake. There are lots of these. Paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, but it is not. It is a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. That is from Science magazine. Then you have the problem where we find modern birds have been found in and below the layers containing the missing link. So you have fully formed modern birds, just like today, and again, you find them in layers below the ancient birds and the animals where you find the missing link, the halfway point. So once again, how did that work out? Okay, how did the modern bird evolve from the ancient bird if the modern bird was buried below in different layers of sediment? Anyway, okay, see if I can find out. Okay, so we are going to go over just a couple of the differences between reptiles and birds, just to show how vastly different they are. Remember how hard it was going to be just to make an eye? Well, you got a lot more problems going from reptile to bird. Okay, so here are the major issues that we find. Okay, number one, the heart. Reptiles have a 3-chambered heart. Birds have a 4-chambered heart. Okay, number two, the bones. Many birds that fly have hollow bones. Makes them lighter, obviously easier to fly. Number three are the lungs. The flying bird has incredible lungs that are necessary for flight. You see, flying takes a lot of energy, therefore it takes a lot of oxygen. So God designed the birds with special air sacs that are inflatable to store extra oxygenated air for when they fly. Now I'm going to show you how this works, and we'll see how well this goes. Here we have my terribly crude drawing of a bird's respiratory system. Hopefully you can see that. So you can see the head of the bird and the trachea. The trachea is where the bird breathes the air and it goes down into its lungs. You have a trachea, often called a windpipe. Additionally, you will see the lungs, and you will see an anterior and a posterior air sac. Now, in this illustration, the bird is going to start with non-oxygenated air in his lungs. Okay? So when we breathe in, our lungs are full of oxygenated air, and you can hold your breath, okay, for roughly a maximum amount of time of about 2 minutes. And while you're holding your breath, okay, your blood is pulling the oxygen out of your lungs and circulating it through your body to all your muscles and everything in your body. And the air in your lungs all of a sudden gets depleted of oxygen. It's still air, just doesn't have any oxygen left. So then you breathe out, and then you breathe back in, more oxygenated air, okay? So right now, the bird has bad air in his lungs, non-oxygenated air, and he needs to breathe in a big breath of oxygenated air, okay? So here we go. What's going to happen is the bird is going to breathe in more air than its lungs can contain. So it's going to fill its lungs, but it's also going to inflate its posterior air sac. It's like a balloon. It has a whole bunch of air in it, but it's not lungs. It doesn't use the oxygen in it. It just fills it up and stores it, okay? So here's how it works. Just hit the wrong button. Bird breathes in oxygenated air, fills up the anterior air sac, fills up its lungs with oxygenated air, and pushes the non-oxygenated air out of its lungs into a anterior air sac. Because keep in mind, it can't get rid of the air it's breathing in. So then what happens is the air in its lungs gets used up, there's no more oxygen in it, and now the bird is going to breathe out. When the bird breathes out, it gets rid of the non-oxygenated air in its lungs and the anterior air sac, and the oxygenated air in its posterior air sac fills up its lungs. Okay, let's see how this goes. So he breathes out, all the bad air goes out of his lungs and the anterior air sac, and the good oxygenated air in the posterior air sac fills his lungs. So what is happening is when the bird breathes in and when the bird breathes out, he fills his lungs with oxygenated air. You get that? So he has double the capacity that you and I have. Every time you breathe in and out once, you fill your lungs one time with oxygenated air. The bird does it twice. Okay, I have no idea where I am in my notes. Give me 1 second to find it. Okay, here we go. And keep in mind, that system, the evolutionist says, came about by chance. I think that's absurd. I think it was designed very well. Additionally, birds are warm-blooded. Reptiles are ectothermic or cold-blooded. These are all the differences between the reptiles and the birds and the things that have to be overcome for one to evolve into the other. Okay, so now let's change gears here just a little bit, and we're going to talk about intermediary fossils. The British Museum of Natural History has the largest fossil collection in the world. When the senior paleontologist was asked why he did not show the missing links in his book, he said, "I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line, there is not one such fossil." So, when you have someone tell you that the overwhelming, amazing evidence for evolution is in the fossil record, you can take them to the head paleontologist of the British Museum of Natural History, which has the largest fossil collection on planet Earth, and he says, how many intermediary fossils are there? 0. There's not one that he knows of on planet Earth. Let's see. There are pictures like this one in every biology textbook in America, but none of them have animals in intermediary stages. You just never find one. And keep in mind, that is not Patrick Hayes talking. I've given you some dozen quotes by leading evolutionists that say the same thing. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. That was Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University. If there was ever an evolutionist that did not believe in God, he's one of them. Because of the complete absence of intermediary fossils, a new theory appeared called punctuated equilibrium. This smacks of desperation. The first bird hatched from a reptilian egg. I didn't make that up. I would be ashamed to say that in public. That's the theory. So instead of gradual changes, it happened in giant leaps. So the textbooks teach that evolution happened in one of two ways: slowly, like Darwin said, or it happened quickly, like Stephen Jay Gould said. But for whatever reason, they are unwilling to look at a third option. Evolution did not happen at all. God created everything in a literal 6-day creation 6,000 years ago, just like the Bible said, and there's great variety within each kind of an animal. 1,600 years later, 4,400 years ago, there was a flood in the days of Noah. 2 of every animal got on board. 2 of every animal got off. They started to reproduce, and still today there is a great variety of every kind of animal, but one kind never, ever, ever produces another kind. For some reason, I don't know why people fight that idea. And you know what? I gotta admit it, I'm the weirdo. Do you realize that? In Christianity, I'm the weirdo because I believe the book means exactly what it says. I understand that I am the fringe. I'm fine with that. But that's what it says, and it lines up exactly with what we find in the natural world. Lo and behold, it's not a surprise to me. So, this concludes our session on biological evolution. I hope this was helpful, or at least entertaining. If anyone is interested in learning more about this subject, there is more information than anyone could imagine in the way of books and videos. Get in contact with me. I would love to point you to any of this stuff. And finally, before we go, the most important question I could ever ask: are you 100% sure that if you were to die today, you would go to heaven when you died? There is no right or wrong answer to that, just an honest one. And the Bible says you can know heaven is your home. You don't have to wonder, you don't have to hope, you can know. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. It doesn't say you can hope you're saved or you might be saved. It says you call and you shall be saved. And if I can be a help to anyone in any way, please get in touch with me. You can email me at BibleStudyOnTheFarm@gmail.com. Please follow us and like us on Facebook, and that's Facebook.com/BibleStudyOnTheFarm. My name is Patrick Hayes. If I can be a help with any of the creation evolution stuff, and certainly if you're not sure you're going to go to heaven when you die, I would love to take the Bible and talk to you about that. With that, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer.